Hey everyone, my name is Tim, and this is So You Want Me to Believe. I'm sorry if I sound a little off this week. I've been fighting a really nasty cold that I must have picked up on my trip to Chicago. I had about 80 different people cough directly into my face at C2E2, so I was pretty sure I was going to end up being the most recent case of coronavirus. It's just a cold though, I'm not dying. I feel pretty rough, but I'm not dying. Hopefully by next week I'll be back to normal though. I want to once again thank you for the feedback you've provided to me about the show thus far. It sounds like those of you who are actively listening to the show might be a little less interested in having an entire episode focused around an historical event and more interested in the other aspects of the show. I appreciate the honesty, and I will certainly keep that in mind. I won't promise that I'll never do an episode based around an historical topic, but if that's not something you want to regularly listen to, I can limit myself on how much history I do. Keep in mind, though, that my background is in history, and that's one of my biggest interests. So as a compromise, how would you feel about me giving a fun historical fact or short story at the beginning of each episode? It wouldn't be long, and it wouldn't be the focus of the episode, but it might be a neat fun fact that you didn't know before, and may prompt some further investigation on your own. I'm going to try it out this week, and if you like it, I'll continue to come up with some historical fun facts for future episodes. So, with that being said, here is this week's historical fact. In July of 1518, a woman by the name of Frau Trophy stepped into the streets in her hometown of Strasbourg, a city in present-day France, but at the time under the control of the Holy Roman Empire. She started silently dancing in the street, seemingly unable to stop herself. She would continue to dance without ceasing for days and days. After about a week of this, other citizens would begin to join her. In fact, about 36 others would have joined her by this time. This would continue through August and finally ending in September, claiming hundreds of victims who would literally dance themselves to death. And when I say they wouldn't stop dancing, they really wouldn't stop dancing. Several people collapsed from exhaustion, while others died from strokes or heart attacks. Local physicians couldn't explain the phenomenon and simply blamed the dancing on the presence of hot blood, stating that the victims' bodies were gyrating in an effort to dance the fever away. This event has since been described as a mass mania, but what could have possibly caused the people of Strasbourg to go on a deadly dancing spree? Unfortunately, we can't really say, but one theory postured by historian John Waller states that there may have been a belief that they were cursed by Saint Vicus, a Catholic saint who 16th century Europeans believed had the power to curse people with a dancing plague. It wouldn't be the first or last time a wild belief led a large number of people to partake in seemingly insane activity that would ultimately cost people their lives. If you don't already know, Patreon is an online membership platform that provides business tools for creators to run a subscription content service. It allows subscribers or patrons to help creators to continue producing content while offering exclusive rewards and perks for their support. The link to my Patreon page is www.patreon.com/SYWMTBpod. There are 3 tiers, each with their own set of incentives. If you'd like to check those out, follow that link to the page and they are listed there for you. If you do like the show, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. Everyone who subscribes not only gets exclusive content, but it goes a long way in helping me produce the show. Any support is greatly appreciated. I also want to plug Buzzsprout. I don't have enough of a listener base to get an actual sponsor, so to be clear, Buzzsprout is not sponsoring the show, but they are a great service that offers content creators affiliate partnerships, so I do want you to know about them. Buzzsprout is a podcast hosting service that allows creators to put the content they make out into the world. If you've ever been interested in starting your own podcast like I'm doing now, Buzzsprout is an excellent resource to help you achieve that goal. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know I sent you, get you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and help support the show. I use Buzzsprout, and it's really helped make putting out my podcast an easy task. Buzzsprout offers a lot of useful and convenient features, like tons of guides to help you find the right equipment at the right price, getting your show listed in every major podcast platform, and by providing a great-looking podcast website that includes audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners. The team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed, so join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. This week, I want to focus on two different cases out of Australia. These two women both died in a questionable manner, both seem to have had botched police investigations, and both had a lot of personal things in common. These two women were Phoebe Handsjuk and Baillee Schneider. I'm going to start by talking about Phoebe's unusual death. But before I start, I just want to give a huge shout out to the Morbid podcast, the Crime Time podcast, and the Extraordinary Stories podcast. I listen to all three of these to get information about this case, and there's a lot to sift through. These three podcasts are really well done, so I would encourage you to check them out as well. Phoebe Handsjuk was a 23-year-old woman who lived with her on-again, off-again boyfriend by the name of Ant Hampel. Ant was a pretty wealthy man who came from a prestigious family. His father was a retired Supreme Court judge, and his stepmother was an active county court judge. Ant himself made quite a lot of money working as an event manager who worked with some pretty prominent celebrities. Phoebe met Ant when he went to get a haircut at a salon Phoebe had been working in. Not long after they started dating, Phoebe moved in with Ant into his luxury apartment located in the Valencia building in Melbourne. Before I get much further here, I do want to briefly mention some information about Phoebe herself. According to her family, she was a vibrant, outgoing woman, but she did suffer from bouts of anxiety and possibly depression. She started using alcohol at the early age of 15 in order to cope with her feelings. She was a very beautiful woman and had a kind of allure that men couldn't seem to resist. However, she seemed to have an attraction to older men, which was the case with her and Ant. I believe Phoebe was 22 when she met Ant, and he was 39. I could be wrong about those exact ages, but I do know that there was a 17-year difference in age between the two of them. Ant was also a little bit controlling. Phoebe was an artistic soul, and she liked a little bit of clutter in her life. Ant, on the other hand, liked the apartment to be spotless, almost as if no one even lived there. And according to Phoebe's dad, in an interview he had with 60 Minutes Australia, he said Phoebe loved Ant but didn't believe the relationship was going anywhere and didn't really want to stay with him. All of that is just a little bit of background, and I'll let you determine later if you think any of that was relevant information. So, on December 2nd, 2010, at 9:01 a.m., Ant gets up and leaves for work while Phoebe is still fast asleep in bed. A couple hours later, at 11:43 a.m., a fire alarm goes off in the apartment building, and Phoebe is caught on CCTV leaving the apartment building with her dog. She waits outside with the rest of the building's tenants for about 7 minutes before the management informs them that this was a false alarm and allows everyone back inside. This is the last time Phoebe is seen alive. At 6:09 p.m. that evening, Ant's keycard was swiped, letting him back into his apartment. When he walks in, he sees Phoebe's handbag and keys on the bench, but there was no sign of her in the apartment. There also appeared to be 2 glasses sitting on the table and broken glass on the floor. Ant reported that the apartment was a mess, which was unusual. He said there were several post-it notes stuck to the kitchen counter that had strange scribbles on them, and when he went into the bedroom, he found what he referred to as a shrine on the bed. The so-called shrine consisted of pictures of him and Phoebe, a picture of her cat, and a bunch of handwritten notes that Ant described as incoherent ramblings she would write when she was smashed. He also said there were candles burning and her hair straightener had been on the bathroom floor, still plugged in. It's my understanding, though, that this shrine was never actually found. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but if it is, it seems a little strange to me that he would make something like that up. But there are more strange occurrences here. After seeing Phoebe's keys on the counter, you would think Ant would attempt to look for her, or even just try to call her and see what's going on. She wouldn't need the keys to leave the apartment or even the building, but she would need them to get back in. So if she left her keys inside the apartment and she wasn't there, best case scenario would be that she accidentally locked herself out of the apartment. But Ant doesn't do anything to reach Phoebe, nor does he try to contact anyone else about where she might be. Even more strange, Ant and Phoebe were supposed to be meeting Phoebe's dad for dinner at one of their favorite restaurants in town. It would be unlike Phoebe to miss that kind of thing, especially without notice. Phoebe found family events like this to be important, so it would have been strange that she was nowhere to be found so close to the time that they were expected to be meeting her dad. But again, Ant doesn't do anything to find out what's going on. Instead, Ant orders food for delivery to be sent to the apartment. Food for one, from the same restaurant they were supposed to be going to that evening. So why would he do that unless he didn't expect for her to return? And if he did expect her to return and just didn't think she would be making the dinner reservations, why food for one? Ant has been cleared as a suspect in this case, so to be totally clear, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, But all of this behavior just strikes me as odd, and I don't understand how it was explained away. So sometime within the hour after Aunt arrived home, the concierge of the building was going about her day, just looking for a broom in the refuse room. I'm not sure what we might refer to this type of room as in the United States, but this was the room that held the trash compactor for the building, and I guess they kept other cleaning supplies in there. I guess it's similar to a janitor's closet, I don't really know, but 60 Minutes Australia called it a refuse room, so that's what I'm going to call it. Anyway, the concierge was looking for a broom and went to open the door of the refuse room, but something seemed to be blocking the door. So she kind of forced it open, and when she could finally see through the door, she saw a woman's bloodied body was blocking the door. Obviously, that woman was Phoebe Handsjuk. About an hour after Aunt had placed his food order, the delivery guy shows up and tells Aunt there's a bunch of police in the lobby and was asking him what was going on. Aunt told him he wasn't sure, so he put the food in his apartment and went downstairs to check it out. He asked the police what was going on, and they told him they found a woman's body. So Aunt says, "Oh, could that be my girlfriend? She appears to have gone missing." Which, I don't know about you, that seems like a strange way to react to what could potentially be the death of your girlfriend. Also, with all of his behavior prior to this, it seems like he had already assumed Phoebe was dead. To me, it sounds like he knew the answer to that question before he even asked, but again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. But to make things even more strange, the police said they took him down to the police station to get a statement from him, and that he was crying uncontrollably. But it didn't appear to be real, according to the detective. They said he looked as if he was crying, but he didn't see any tears coming from his eyes, and his nose appeared to be completely dry. They made a point to say that this seemed like he was putting on a show, but then they cleared him of any wrongdoing, so I don't know what the point of that was. So when Phoebe is found and the police are called, they almost immediately believe that she had committed suicide. I couldn't really find how they came to that conclusion, but that's what has been reported. But how did she end up in that room, especially without being seen? Well, Phoebe had gone feet first down the trash chute on the 11th floor, dropped all the way down to the compactor which almost completely severed her right foot, survived the fall, then crawled around the dark room trying to find a way out. She eventually died from blood loss. The police investigation into this was botched from the beginning. I think probably because they assumed that Phoebe had committed suicide, they didn't take the necessary steps that they should have taken to rule anything else out or to actually see if Phoebe was still alive. No paramedics were called, and police refused advice to call them. It's possible that when Phoebe was discovered that she was still alive, but police just assumed she was already dead and didn't bother calling anyone to try and resuscitate her. We don't know that for sure. She could have been dead when the concierge discovered her, but a huge concern of this case is that since no paramedics were called, we can't say for sure what her time of death was, and it is medically possible for her to have still been alive at that time. Police also didn't do a comprehensive sweep of the building for evidence. Again, I think that's because they thought it was a pretty straightforward suicide. But there are several things they should have done that they did not. For example, there was blood found in the apartment on the computer desk, the computer mouse, and the door handle on the door to the room in which the computer was housed. They did notice the blood, but they didn't take any samples to test, so there's no way to know whose blood that was. It's just assumed that it was Phoebe's blood. They also didn't look at the computer where the blood was found. There could have been like a suicide note on there or even a Google search that could have given them some information, but they didn't look into any of it. It's obvious that the computer was used either by the person whose blood that was or by someone who had someone's blood on them, but they didn't bother to look into it at all. And apparently they didn't look for any CCTV footage either for the events of that day. There seems to be some conflicting information about that though, because Phoebe was seen on CCTV earlier that day, but the footage they had of her was when she was leaving the building during the fire alarm. So I don't know if that means there wasn't a working camera on their floor, or if maybe the footage they looked at was from earlier that day. I don't know, but if you look at the pictures of the Baillee building or the CCTV footage that is available, it's pretty clear this building is for people with money. So it seems strange to me that there wouldn't be cameras on every floor, in the elevators, and the stairwells, pretty much everywhere. You would think security would be a priority for people with that kind of money, so it's odd to me that there isn't any other footage, but I'm not sure what the reasoning for that is. One thing the police did do was attempt to take fingerprints from the garbage chute. However, they weren't able to pull any fingerprints from it. None whatsoever. This is also incredibly odd, and I don't really understand why it wasn't questioned further. If Phoebe had committed suicide, then her fingerprints should have been all over the door to that garbage chute. Unless she was wearing gloves, but she wasn't. But furthermore, this was a trash chute for the entire floor, so there should have been all kinds of fingerprints on it, but they didn't find any. To me, that sounds like someone cleaned the door, so no fingerprints would be found. Of course, you could explain that away by claiming that the building's cleaner wiped them away, and I suppose that's plausible, but I don't know why the building's cleaner would be worried about the state of the garbage chute door. Maybe that building liked everything to look shiny and new, including the waste receptacles, but I've never seen a garbage chute that wasn't brand new that looks sparkly clean. Phoebe's body was taken in for an autopsy, and again, the findings make a suicide questionable. Phoebe was found to have bruising on her upper right arm, her wrists, and her neck. Now, the bruising on her arms could have happened during the fall down the chute. But the bruising on her neck? I couldn't find much out about that, but I personally believe that this shows some type of attempted strangulation, and I think you'll see why in a bit. Phoebe also had her jeans pulled down to her knees when she was found, but the autopsy did not show any signs of sexual assault. But this is also really weird. How did her pants get pulled down? It would make sense if she was going down the chute head first, they could have caught on something or just been pulled down by the friction of the tight space, but Phoebe went down the chute feet first, so it couldn't have happened during the fall. The only logical explanations I can think of are if it had been done for some reason prior to her going down the chute, or if when she landed she tried to get her pants off for some reason. Either way, this doesn't really seem to have been questioned either. They also did a blood test on Phoebe and found that her blood alcohol content was at 0.16, which is about 3 times the legal limit to drive in Australia. The legal limit in Australia is 0.05, which is less than the 0.08 that those of us in the United States are used to seeing. They also found evidence of a drug called zolpidem in her system. Zolpidem is the generic name for a drug called Stilnox. However, in the United States, we would most commonly know that drug as Ambien. They're the same drug, it's just produced by 2 different companies and given different names for branding purposes. The alcohol and zolpidem in her blood were 2 huge factors that led to the coroner's conclusions on how Phoebe died. According to the coroner, here's what happened. Phoebe, under the influence of zolpidem and alcohol, dropped a glass in her apartment and cut herself when picking it up, which explains why the blood was found in the apartment. She then went to throw the broken pieces of glasses away in the garbage chute, and in a state of confusion or possibly due to an effect of sleepwalking, Phoebe climbed into the garbage chute and slid down. Therefore, the coroner found that this wasn't a case of homicide or suicide, but that it was just an unfortunate accident. There are so many problems with that finding. For example, they were never able to recover anything that Phoebe had thrown down the chute. It just didn't exist. Also, if she did throw away the pieces of glass, why did Aunt find them on the floor of the apartment? And if there was blood on the computer, and all of this really did happen, then Phoebe was bleeding. Why wasn't there blood on or around the garbage chute? The coroner did ultimately deem this an accident, but with so many questions surrounding Phoebe's death, people were pretty outraged that they didn't give an open finding after the autopsy, which would really mean that they would need more evidence from the police investigation to come to a conclusion on this. And because this was never considered a possible homicide, there were no suspects in the case. Even with the strange behavior Ant was exhibiting, they didn't suspect him of any wrongdoing. And really, he had a pretty strong alibi. He was at work all day. Now, honestly, to me, I don't think that's a super strong alibi, but police said he's not involved, so that's where the suspicion has to end. Now, Phoebe's family was obviously shocked by the ruling that this was an accident, and they weren't just going to accept that as fact. So with the help of 60 Minutes Australia, they built an exact replica of the chute and tried to reenact the coroner's theory. The chute itself was about 1 meter off the ground, and the opening of the chute was only about 36 centimeters wide. That's pretty snug even for somebody of Phoebe's size. The family asked one of Phoebe's friends to participate in the reenactment, as she was Phoebe's match in weight and size, and would give an accurate representation of how well Phoebe herself would have been able to pull it off. You can find a clip of the reenactment on YouTube if you want to watch it, but Phoebe's friend really struggled to get up into the chute and then almost needs help getting down into it. And she was completely sober, where Phoebe was under the influence, which you would think would make it harder. And to top this off, the family got into contact with sleep physicians as experts on Phoebe's state, something the police had also never done, who determined that with the amount of zolpidem and alcohol found in her blood, Phoebe would have either been physically incapacitated or would have had some sort of enhanced ability to get into the chute due to some delusional determination. Either way, though, they agreed that an open finding would have been the appropriate conclusion drawn from the evidence, and they could not say for sure what happened to Phoebe. Another interesting note here is that Phoebe's family raised about $50,000 to have an official inquest done into this case. What's strange about that is that Ant tried to block the family's attempt at getting the inquest. I don't know why he would do that unless he had something to hide, but he did not want the inquest to take place. Eventually, though, the inquest did take place, and the same ruling was given that Phoebe's death was an accident. There doesn't appear to be much information regarding that inquest, but it still seems like not much was done to find additional information. Obviously, Phoebe's parents still do not believe this was an accident, nor do they believe it was a suicide. Her mom makes a pretty good point about the suicide angle. She says they lived on the 11th floor of the building. If she wanted to commit suicide, wouldn't you think she would just jump off the balcony rather than the complicated way she went through the garbage chute? Now, obviously, I'm in the same camp as the family. I don't think this was a suicide attempt, and I don't think this was an accident. Ant has been cleared of any suspicion in this case, and I don't want anyone to think I'm accusing him of anything here. But could someone else have been involved in Phoebe's death? There are just so many unanswered questions. Now I want to move on to the second case, and this is the death of Baillee Schneider. This is still an ongoing investigation, so I don't have nearly the same amount of information that I did with Phoebe, but her death was also very unusual. Baillee Schneider was a 25-year-old dental assistant and part-time model, also living in Melbourne. She lived with her parents at the time of her death in a place called Moonee Ponds. On June 24, 2018, Bailey's parents decided to leave the house for a couple of hours to go shopping. When they went to tell Baillee where they were going, they said she was curled up on the couch next to the family dog and talking intently on the phone. They didn't know who she was talking to, but they assumed it was probably her boyfriend that they didn't know much about. Baillee didn't talk to her parents much about her relationships. She only seemed to confide in her sister Lily about her love life, so the parents didn't really question it. However, Baillee had been out with her boyfriend the night before at a backyard barbecue where they had gotten into a fight. It's not super clear what the fight was about, but she was still pretty miffed about it the next morning. However, her parents say she had composed herself by the time they had left the house. When the parents returned to the house, they found Baillee on the kitchen floor, slumped up in the corner of the cabinets, dead. She had a gold cord wrapped tightly around her neck that had come from her bedroom, and she was unable to be revived. When the police came, they found that Baillee had poured herself a glass of wine and smoked a cigarette sometime after her parents had left the house. Her Bluetooth speaker had also recently been used, and I assume that just means they found it turned on. There's not a ton of information about the investigation as of now because, like I said, the investigation is still ongoing. But we do know after the autopsy was performed, the toxicology report showed a low blood alcohol content as expected from the wine, and it also showed traces of cocaine in her system. There don't appear to be any conclusions drawn from that, only to say that the parents didn't expect that to be the case. It's not a complete surprise, though. According to her parents, she had recently fallen on hard times financially. I'm not sure how aware her parents were of what she was doing to supplement her income, but apparently she had been performing at a strip club where she was introduced to some unhealthy influences. So that's probably how the cocaine came into play. Her parents also said that Baillee occasionally had some trouble with alcohol, drugs, and erratic behavior. So when the police deemed her death to have been the result of suicide, they thought maybe her struggles with those things might have led her to an extreme act of self-harm. But again, there are too many unanswered questions here for them to be satisfied with that answer. The biggest question here is, where did she hang herself? She was found in the kitchen, so the hanging would have had to have taken place in the kitchen. But there are no obvious hanging points in the kitchen. But also, the ligature marks on her neck did not appear to be self-inflicted, or at least they couldn't be conclusively determined to be self-inflicted. I'm not sure how they know that, but that's what the report showed. So, Baillee and Phoebe died in completely different manners, although both had lots of questions surrounding their deaths. But the two personally did have a lot in common. In an article written by Richard Baker for The Age in June of 2019, Baker says, like Phoebe Handsjuk, Miss Schneider often dated older men. Other similarities included their stunning looks, self-esteem issues, and difficulties coping with alcohol. But both could also be great fun, able to light up a room with their presence, and were treasured by their friends. Both cared deeply for animals and had a sensitive side, often expressed in a personal diary. But there's just one other thing the two women had in common. While Bailey's parents may not have known much about her love life, Baillee had in fact been dating a man for the last 9 months. She didn't talk much about him or post much about him on social media, but she was deeply involved with the man at the time of her death. That man was Ant Hampel. Now, again, Ant was not a suspect in this case. He is believed to be one of the last people Baillee spoke with the day that she died, but he has not been linked to her death. And again, this is an ongoing investigation, so I don't know what information they may have dug up since the case was reopened, but it is worth mentioning that this case is now being investigated as a murder. It's unclear who the suspects are at this time, though. One other fact of this case that could lead in a different direction is that shortly before Baillee's death, the Victorian police had been in contact with her regarding an alleged sexual assault on her. Apparently, a strange man came to her house looking for her, which her brother witnessed. He didn't know who the man was, but it was not Ant. Baillee willingly got into a car with the man and they drove off. There's not a lot of details about the events here either, but apparently Ant called Baillee's sister Lily the next morning saying he got some sort of disturbing text from Baillee and that she was clearly upset about something. Lily convinced Baillee to call the police and report the sexual assault, but Baillee ended up withdrawing the report, saying that she wouldn't be pressing any charges. That's about everything I know about that incident, but it leads me to wonder if maybe Baillee had started escorting for some extra cash. Escorting doesn't necessarily have to involve sex, so maybe the man hired her as an escort, expected sex, wasn't getting what he wanted, and forced himself on her. But maybe she was afraid to talk to police about it because she was an aspiring model and didn't really want it to be public knowledge that she was escorting. It's not illegal to escort in Australia, but it certainly isn't considered a respectable job. And I have no evidence that she was escorting. This is literally just a theory that I developed myself with the limited information I have available. I could be completely off on that one. But since she had been working in strip clubs for extra cash, I don't know that it's a huge stretch to say that escorting might have been the next step for some easy money. The last thing I want to mention here is that Baillee's family did hold a memorial service for a large number of friends and family after her death. Strangely enough, though, Ant did not attend the service. So, those are the stories of Phoebe Handsjuk and Baillee Schneider's deaths. What do you think happened to these ladies? Were their deaths self-inflicted, or was someone else involved? I think you can guess where my suspicion lays, but let me know what your theories are surrounding these cases. If you'd like to share those theories with me, please feel free to send me an email. My email address is sywmtbpod@gmail.com. Also, if you have any ideas for future episodes, feel free to email those to me as well. I have gotten some pretty interesting topic suggestions so far, so keep an eye out. I might just be doing an episode based on your suggestions. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. The link for that is in the show notes. Please follow me on social media for updates on the show. My Facebook page is titled So You Want Me to Believe Podcast, so please like me there. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is @sywmtbpod on both platforms. Also, keep an eye out for a link for my YouTube page. I'm going to start hosting the audio to the podcast in video format as well for an alternative way to listen if you'd prefer to check out the show there. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show, and I will see you all again next